What was your experience of the Great Depression?
Everybody asks me that, and yet I really wasn't aware that there was it was only a word as far as I could see, because my father was one of the few men who had a job all through the Depression. My father was never without work. He was a linotype operator for 50 years, and he was the fastest typist I ever saw in my whole life. His fingers just flew over the keys. We'd love to stand there and watch him type. And of course, that's how we learned to read and how we learned to write, because he would read stories to us every night when we went to bed. And I thought, gee, I'd like to be able to do that myself. I'd like to read those stories. And by the time I got into kindergarten, I could already read. And I think that's when I first realized that teachers underestimate kids. They keep everybody at the same standard when they should allow those that are a little smarter to move ahead and give extra help to those who need it.
How old were you when you graduated high school?
I was 17.
And how old were you when the war in Europe ended, or started?
Well, it started in '39, so I must have been 16. And then in '41, that's when we got into the war. And I was still in high school. I must have been a sophomore. But I remember the war effort and saving tin cans, cutting the tops off and flattening the tin cans, and getting ration books. You only got so much sugar and so much coffee, and we didn't really mind because we always had plenty. We had a garden and we could feed ourselves, and we had chickens and we had eggs and we had ducks, and I never went hungry.
When the war was on, did you travel a lot?
Yes, I did. Traveled down to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. I followed your dad around, actually. I never went to Fort Bragg when he had his basic training, but I went to Fort Sill, and I remember, and we had, of course, David was about 9 months old, and I remember the bells pealing and ringing loud, and we woke up and said, "What's happening? What's happening?" They said, "It's D-Day. The Yanks have gone into France." And that's the first inkling I had that we were really going after them. So, and your dad left right after that.
Okay. And so then you were kind of a single mom there for a while.
Yeah, well, and I also followed him to California, where he was in the hospital for, I remember, something made him yellow. What is that?
Hepatitis.
Hepatitis, yeah. His whole eyes were yellow, and he was in there for about 3 weeks, so I stayed with his mother during that time.
And so how old were you when he came home from the war?
He came back in '46, so I would have been about 19, 20, something like that.
Okay. Describe your first apartment.
Well, the first one was in Milwaukee, of course, and my mother paid our rent for the first month because we didn't have any money. But it was pretty large, and I think the rent was $10 a month. We didn't have $10.
Did you have furniture?
Well, it was furnished.
Oh, okay.
So, no, I didn't. We didn't own any furniture.
Later on, after your husband came home from the war, you took a job as a maid.
Oh, yes.
What was that
3
like?
different families. The first one had 3 children. I was there for a year and a half. That was in Waukesha. Then when I got the job in Milwaukee, that was with the mother-in-law of Donald O'Connor. She worked at Arthur Murray Studios. That was a great job. I was there for 2 years. I loved it. And then when they went back to Beverly Hills, they wanted us to move with them. And that was a big decision for us to make, because she said, "We'll give you your own apartment. You'll have your own grounds. You can use the swimming pool. You have access to everything." She made it very inviting, but we talked it over, and your dad decided he wanted to go into business for himself, and he didn't want to move to California. He didn't want to be near his mother. So we stayed, and then I got another job, and I was at that one for 5.5 years, and that was with a Jewish family. And then I became pregnant with you.
Okay. What was the first car you learned to drive?
oh my gosh. I think it was an Oldsmobile. And I remember the father tried to teach me, and he was a terrible, terrible teacher. And he made me so angry, I was crying. So I got out of the car and left the car with him and said, I'm gonna walk home. And I got on the bus and went home and left the car with him. And he had to drive it home. He made me so angry. And the next week I signed up for a 6 weeks course with a driving instructor who was very nice, and I learned to drive.
Was that a stick shift?
Yes, that was a stick shift.
Yeah.
Mhm.
What invention do you think has been the greatest in your lifetime?
I think the automobile. A lot of people say the internet, but I think the automobile was first because it gave people a different view of the world. They were able to travel and not live in the same area for 50 years and never know what's going on in the rest of the world. With a car, they could visit their neighbors, they could go to other states, and then the interstate highways were built. Before the automobile, there was no need for those, and the roads were bad. So once the automobile was invented and people started driving, the whole world changed as far as access to everything. You could drive to town and buy your groceries. You didn't have to be dependent on what you're raising. You could drive across the country if you wanted to with the new roads. In fact, I remember this boss of mine where I was working said, the internet, invest in cement. But we didn't have any money to invest, but I wish now I'd had some, because they needed cement to make those highways. He was right, and he was Jewish. He became very wealthy.
Invest in cement?
In cement,
Yeah.
I remember him saying, I think it was 1949 or 50, and they were just starting to people were coming back from the war, and people were driving and buying more cars, and the automobile industry was humming. Invest in cement, make a fortune. Yeah, but we didn't have any money to invest.